Welcome to the Martin County Bar Association's Law Day presentation on election laws. I'm Sean Plymel, and I'm honored to have Vicki Davis, our Supervisor of Elections, and David Earl, another attorney in town, to talk to you today a little bit about elections and election laws and the various issues that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to casting their vote here in Martin County for both our local, state, and federal races. So thank you again. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, I'm honored to be here today and be a part of Law Day. It's really an important day to focus on law and with an emphasis on election law. I think that's really important because it really is a specialized area, and you don't think about the area of election law until there's an issue.
Something happens.
Exactly.
Right, and we are obviously fortunate in Martin County. David and I have served as advisors in a lot of different elections throughout the years in case there's a problem, and he and I just end up hanging out and talking about other stuff, and we're very fortunate, and a lot of that credit obviously goes to you. You obviously do a wonderful job, and we're very happy to have you as our Supervisor of Elections. But obviously, knowing your stuff and knowing the laws that apply is one of the reasons that you can make it look so easy. So when we talk about election laws and people take a lot of things for granted, I know some of the ones that come up that we'll talk a little bit about is how far you can be here standing holding a sign. But what, kind of is the primer that you got as a Supervisor of Elections when you started, to let you know what laws that you needed to be concerned about?
As a newcoming Supervisor of Elections, which was 10 years ago, I can't believe I've been in this position for almost 10 years now, our state association, the Florida State Association of Supervisors of Elections, conducts an orientation, and they really go into depth with election law. In addition to that, we have the ability in the state of Florida, our association has created a certified election program for Florida election officials. It's for supervisors and staff, so that we can go in and participate in classes and really get in depth with law and rules and opinions, all of those different facets that comprise the entire election process. So it's really in-depth and detailed, and as I tell community members, poll workers, everything that we do in the elections office is according to either federal law and or Florida law. They basically go hand in hand. You go back to the Constitution of the United States, our Bill of Rights and the amendments, and from there you go to the Voting Rights Act, the National Voting Rights Act, and it just all has compounded together to create the system that we're currently under.
So
that
generally, if there's a question, there's a rule.
There's a rule, and if there's not an answer, there are a lot of different court cases that will decide what the answer is, as you well know.
What sort of things really radically changed after the 2000 elections? I know certainly the way we cast our ballot after the infamous butterfly ballots and all that certainly changed, but was there a lot of regulation that was changed after that election?
Yeah. After the election of 2000, the federal government put into place the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, and the federal act eliminated our old lever machines. David, you well remember our old lever machines that we had here in Martin County.
We used to use those lever machines in Martin County successfully for years and years and years.
They were decertified, as well as the punch card ballots, the butterfly ballot. So the only two systems that were left throughout not just the state of Florida, but the United States, was either touchscreen, the electronic, which we went to in Martin County, or optical scan, the paper ballot
Important
method.
to note that you said we went to, meaning that we're not still there.
Exactly, because in 2008, it would have been in 2007, the governor legislature enacted that we would make a change in the state of Florida, that all voting would be uniform throughout the state and that we would all use a paper ballot. So we're now under the optical scan system throughout the state of Florida so that we have a paper trail.
That's just further ping effect from the first Bush election, I think.
Yeah.
That sort of kind of educated us how we're going to do this as we go forward. But you mentioned the old voting machines,
Yes.
the old, I call them the old iron machines. What amazed me is I thought about it in preparing to come here today. There's so many different ways you can vote here today. And what I mean is, back in the day, you went on Election Day.
Yeah.
It was kind of the
And pulled the
tradition.
lever.
It was tradition.
And still, that is a big tradition here in Martin County in very many of our precincts. But what I like to do is, we've got early voting here now, and maybe you ought to just touch a little bit on all the different ways people can exercise their constitutional right to vote, which is, again, the theme of Law Day, which is we want to
Every vote counts.
accentuate that every vote does count, and there's so many ways you can vote today. Can't you, Vicki?
Sure, absolutely. In the state of Florida, we have 3 different methods by which a voter can cast their vote. Number 1, they can go to the polls on Election Day in the traditional manner. But actually, our election starts with the mailing of ballots. And we're required by law, Florida law and federal law, to mail our ballots 45 days before Election Day to military and overseas residents and voters. So we start that process 45 days before, and then early voting kicks in about 14 days before Election Day. There's been that flexibility with a change in statute, so now.
So Vicki, we've really seen the way that people vote change with all of these new ways to vote.
Yeah, in Florida we do have 3 different ways by which you can cast your vote. By voting by mail, which begins 45 days before Election Day. We're required by Florida and federal law to mail our ballots to the military and those living and residing overseas but are still registered voters in the state of Florida and in Martin County. So 45 days before Election Day, we start mailing ballots. It continues until that Wednesday before Election Day. That's the last day we can mail a ballot to a voter. And then about 14 days prior to Election Day, early voting will begin. And then, of course, we have Election Day. But the method by which voters are choosing to cast their vote has changed dramatically since 2002, the first year that early voting was made optional in the state of Florida. 76% of our voters went to the polls in 2002 to cast a vote. And when you look at 2008 presidential election, there were only 31% that went to the polls to cast a vote.
And Vicki, you have a graphic that shows kind of all of the votes. Can you hold that up for our?
Sure.
And we'll see if we can post that up for the viewers to see, because it really shows the drastic difference of how people are casting their vote.
It's a dramatic shift because people are taking advantage of the convenience factor they like, and I know, David, you've told me you like to vote early.
I do.
I'm an early voter.
Well, I've
been an absentee voter.
You know what?
before,
I've been
too.
an absentee voter for years. You know, if I'm traveling in the various things that I'm doing in my job, and I can't be in town on Election Day, I used to, back in the day, always do an absentee ballot. That way I knew I would be able to get my vote in. And I've voted in every election. That's just my responsibility as a citizen.
Right.
But I love this early voting because it gives me the opportunity at my convenience. Vicki's got early voting in her office right on Martin Luther King Boulevard, which is just a couple of minutes from my office. I can kind of slide in at my convenience, have my ID, get my early voting done and get it, avoid all the crowds.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. It's a great
and
opportunity.
your vote has been cast.
Absolutely.
The other part of it too is there are a couple of things with voting by mail. For those residents and registered voters within Martin County who have moved down from the north, a lot of times we've had questions asked, well, if I vote by mail, you're not going to count my ballot unless it's a close election, because that's what they're used to coming down from the northeastern part of the United States. But in Florida, according to Florida law, that's
Every
one of
vote.
the first results that's transmitted up to the state on election night. 30 minutes after the polls close, by or before 7:30 p.m. on election night, we are required, all supervisors throughout the state of Florida, to transmit results of early votes and vote by mail tabulations that we have at that time to the state of Florida for their posting and for their results that they take in. So it's a misnomer, and it's good that voters are hearing that their votes actually do count in the state of Florida.
One of the amazing things about I think Sean referenced earlier that he and I have both been designated observers
Yes.
on election evening. You do that from
Yeah.
time to time. And in particular, since the first Bush election, I think, we've seen that kind of be a little bit more involved in terms of observers. But the improvements you've made in the office over the years with regard to ballot security and integrity kind of strike me a little bit. And maybe you could talk about your office and the types of security measures you have in place to make sure that every ballot is protected, secure, and counted.
That's a great question, and it's great for voters to realize that election since 2000 it's all about security. It's layer upon layer of security. So when I came into office in 2005, we were on the 4th floor of the courthouse with 3,300 square feet of space. There was really no security. There were the 2 doors that went into the office, a bathroom door, and a door to a closet. That was it. So ballots were just stored in the back part of the office. It was my goal to find a location that we could have everything under one roof because the equipment was stored at B&A Flea Market. We're required by Florida law and federal law to maintain records from either one day to forever.
And wasn't the count done at the Blake Library?
The count was at the Blake Library. Yes.
You remember those, back in the old days, you do the count right there in the open at the Blake Library.
Yeah.
I remember, pizza coming in,
Oh, yeah.
it was much more informal in the older days.
Yes.
Yeah, and we'd be
Today.
sitting right across the table, and now we're looking through the window.
Now you're looking
Now
through
we're
a
looking
window.
through the window.
Yes.
Exactly right. Security is very heightened.
Yes, because of the building that the county purchased for us on Martin Luther King, as you referenced earlier, David, we do have the ability to set the canvassing board up in a room that has plate glass windows so that viewers can watch through the windows. We also have a screen in the canvassing board room that transmits signatures to the viewing room so that those who are in there can see how we're looking at signatures and comparing them and making a decision whether to accept or reject that particular signature.
Oftentimes, in that process, the head of your committee,
Yes, canvassing board.
your canvassing board, your 3-person canvassing board, supervisor of elections, usually
county
it's
commissioner.
a county commissioner, and
Judge
county
Roberts.
judge, Judge Roberts.
Yeah.
Judge Roberts will come over and show the observers exactly what you're doing.
She does.
Yeah.
She does.
I can remember it's, through the looking glass
Yes.
almost as she holds them up.
Exactly.
And important for the voters to understand that process too when you do vote absentee, because you got to make sure that your signatures at least, you can't have somebody else sign it or you're probably going to get it pitched.
Exactly, because we're required by Florida law, and it's a tedious, time-consuming task.
That it is.
But it's done. Every single signature is looked at and compared. The signature on that envelope with the voter's certificate that ballot's contained in is compared with the signature in our database. So a pair of eyes, at least one pair of eyes, if not more, have looked at those signatures.
Right. It's
And
one,
then
if,
they go
it's
to
one
the-
if it's accepted, it's a whole bunch if it's not.
Exactly. And then it
Including
goes,
all the observers and everybody.
yep, to canvassing board to make that final determination.
So the viewers out there need to know, make sure your scribbles are consistent because it can be a problem.
True, and we encourage voters, update your signature. We carry with us, we take with us voter registration application forms when we're out in the community encouraging voters to update their signature, because in the last election, and I know it was a combination of different factors in the presidential election, 40% of our 79% turnout, 40% of those that voted in the 2012 presidential election voted by mail.
Really?
Yes. So 73% had voted prior to election day. That's the reason we've reduced the number of precincts throughout the county. We're down to 31 because when you're looking at 27% of your registered voters going to the polls
Right.
on election day, it just makes sense. Put your resources into early voting and voting
So
by mail.
73 were before the election day?
Yes.
And roughly better than half of those were by mail.
40%.
Wow.
Yes, we're by mail.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it continues to increase. And the Florida legislature did a really good thing for voters in the 2013 legislative cycle. They added a provision into law that allows a voter to cure their signature if they have forgotten to sign it. So, and we have a number of those that would come into the office, and it always would break your heart. Oh, this person forgot to sign their ballot certificate. And according to Florida law, at that point in time, when a ballot
It got
was
pitched.
received, well, it was
Well, not
rejected.
pitched.
It was rejected.
I guess you don't throw